hip-hop song by Lil Mo featuring Fabulous.
I love the song so much because it was one of the only songs at the time that was an empowering female song, where Lil Mo's going on about, like, I will save guys with my superpowers, and I will save girls with my superpowers, and I am the superwoman. I thought, this name that I've had for so long that empowered me when I was younger, I'm gonna make this my screen name. Maybe there should be a new series.
Superwoman didn't just burst onto the scene overnight with a viral video. It was a steady climb fueled by hard work.
The moment that I thought this is going somewhere and this could be a career was the first time I performed internationally. It was in India. And it was the first time where I was truly across the world and people knew my videos.
Singh has transformed herself from a bratty kid to an internet personality to a media mogul. She starred in a feature film, A Trip to Unicorn Island, in 2016. And her book, How to Be a Boss, hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2017 while she was on a 30-city international tour. Lily started out with the goal of getting millions of subscribers and financial security.
Hurry the hell up!
But after surpassing those goals, success has new meaning.
I've really come to terms with the fact that my definition of success is what's the best legacy I can leave behind. And it's not the number of views and the number of subscribers. It is the number of people that can say, this girl changed my life or changed something in my life positively.
CTE is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals. There's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like the Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime, you know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, you know, it was like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left the Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company, and that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, and not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars.
In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW!
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that was!
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The superstar wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! It's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the global business team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I remember as a kid, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit sooner than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence, cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had essentially built.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt-or-die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most threatened when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this raw style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programming aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag Give Divas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired 40 more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted more female fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build up their fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
The buck eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly scripted company.
And that goes all the way down the board to big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon always planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could happen with WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if there are swerves ahead.
Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once, and we can't keep up. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Saving the seas. This week, the deep-sea diver who stopped writing the ocean's obituary to find a solution. Enric Sala tells us why the next 10 years matter most. And globalization needs to get greener. Shipping accounts for nearly an eighth of all transport emissions. How can the industry clean up its act? Plus, protecting coastlines comes at a huge environmental cost. But one Israeli startup found a way to keep the sea out and the animals in. From London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. After more than a decade of studying the ocean as an academic, Enric Sala realized he was writing the ocean's obituary. He quit his job and became a full-time conservationist. As an in-house explorer for National Geographic, he's clocked more than 5,000 open water dives. He's also founded Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to lobby countries to protect their oceans. To date, it has helped create marine reserves equivalent to half the size of Canada. I spoke to him about his mission and why it's so urgent.
The state of the world's oceans is really bad. We have lost 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Sharks, groupers, cod, tuna. More than half of the fish stocks are overfished, which means that we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. More than half of the ocean is affected by industrial fishing, and global warming is killing coral reefs all around the world. The ocean is in a trajectory of decline.
Can you just visualize for our viewers who never get to see the kind of things you are able to see, what an ocean and healthy ecosystem looks like versus one that's next to a bustling economic and industrialized area?
Coral reefs in the United States, in the Florida Keys, are down to only 2% of what they used to be. Before, 80 to 90% of the bottom on a coral reef in the Caribbean was covered by live coral. Now, Florida Keys have only 2%. The average in the Caribbean is about 5% of the bottom covered by live coral. The rest is covered by slime and seaweed. And most of the fish you can see are this big. And it is very, very rare that if you jump into any place in the Caribbean at random, you see a shark. It's very, very rare. Now, let's go to Millennium Atoll, for example. An atoll that is uninhabited and fished south of the equator in the Central Pacific, belongs to the Republic of Kiribati. 2009, we conducted the first underwater expedition to these islands, and I still remember the first time. Jumped over the side of the boat, and as soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by 15 gray reef sharks. After a couple minutes, the sharks decided that we were boring, and they went back to do their thing. And you look down, 90% of the seafloor is covered by thriving coral, and it's full of fish, and a sea turtle comes by. Now, this abundance that we rarely see anywhere except in well-managed marine reserves. This is what the ocean used to be like, and this is what we have learned from going to these pristine places.
And you write in your book that you're writing the obituary of ocean life. What's the cure?
The cure is doing less harm. Basically, there are three things that we are doing to the ocean. One is we are taking fish out of the water faster than they can reproduce. Two, we are turning the ocean warmer and more acidic because of man-made climate change. And three, we are throwing in everything that we don't want, our waste and our plastic. We need basically to reverse these trends.
Does this mean that a lot of this falls to governments and their policies?
That's a big part of it, because it is governments that regulate fishing and mineral extraction and oil extraction. It It is governments that have the legal authority to create large marine reserves in the ocean. But also, local communities have an important role to play because some of the most successful protected areas in the ocean are community-led and community-managed marine reserves. So when the fish come back, the divers come in. And that creates huge economic opportunities through ecotourism. These areas that are managed by communities are very successful because the communities have a vested interest in having as many fish as possible inside them so they can enjoy the benefits.
What from the pandemic has changed your view when it comes to protection of the environment?
Nature has given us a very strong signal of how fast it can recover if we just give it space. Everybody was fascinated by all these videos of the whales and the dolphins coming into marinas and mountain lions on the streets of Santiago in Chile, wild goats in the UK. Nature has this extraordinary ability to bounce back if we just give it space. This is why we need to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030.
How do healthy marine ecosystems help in the fight against climate change, though?
Most people see the ocean as a victim of climate change, but the ocean can also be a solution because we know that the more life that is in the ocean, like big fish and big whales, the more these organisms help to make the ocean productive and absorb more CO2. The kelp forest, seagrass beds, all of these are important ecosystems in the ocean that are similar to the forest on the land that capture a lot of our pollutions.
What are you excited about in your field?
We have 10 years to fix this problem. Global fisheries catch is going down, stocks are collapsing. Business as usual means that by 2050, 90% of the coral reefs are gone, that most commercial fisheries have collapsed. That affects food security, that affects a migration of people. We have 10 years to get to peak greenhouse gas emissions and then go carbon neutral by 2050. And we have 10 years to protect at least 30% of the ocean so we can restore much of this health and productivity, not just for saving biodiversity, but also saving our life support system. We are not talking about something that is apart from us. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. So these 10 years are probably the most critical in the history of humanity.
The most accurate measurements of changing oceans will come from space. While Enric Sala explores what lies beneath, a new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission, track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast, and this number will double. The number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So, knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sails to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
one of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast, and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions, an equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube-sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously, if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, E-concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing e-concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism dies, in the case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics. The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser on Bloomberg Radio.
Yes, indeed, everyone. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio right here in New York City, streaming on YouTube. This is Bloomberg Business Week for Tuesday, December 15th. I'm Carol Masser along with Tim Stanovic of Bloomberg Quick Take. So what have you guys been talking about?
Could it be
what, could
Democrats and Republicans meeting today, talking to one another?
God, this is progress. And the markets are certainly reading it that way.
They really are.
Yeah. So this is good. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a lot of things. As you said when you walked into the studio, or you were sitting down already, this is an amazing show.
It is. We have a big show coming up. Some great voices.
All right, so don't go anywhere, anyone. Let's get you going, though, on this Tuesday with the check on that trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
All right, thank you very much. Lots going on. Highs of the day right now. Let me get right to the numbers. I'll give you the why in a moment here with the S&P up 43, up 1.2%. Year to date, up 14.2% on the S&P. The Dow's up 357 right now. Best level right now is you run the GIP screen on the Bloomberg, up by 1.2%, and NASDAQ up 108. That is a gain there of 0.9%. Tenured on 730 seconds, 10-year yield 0.91%. Gold up 1.3%, 18.51 the ounce. Crude up 0.9%. 47 handle with 47.42 right now on West Texas Intermediate crude. Stocks have halted the longest slump since September. Speculation mounting that Congress will agree on a federal spending package. And repeating an earlier headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service, President-elect Joe Biden will name former Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg as his pick for transportation secretary. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stenovic. And let's set the Bloomberg Business Week agenda. And we've got Vince Signorello with us, global macro strategist at Bloomberg News, on the phone from White Plains, New York. Dave Wilson, our stocks editor at Bloomberg News, on the remote access from New Jersey. So, hey, Vince, Tim and I were just saying, like, could it be? Coulda, woulda, shoulda? Maybe could? A stimulus plan?
I really hope so for all those poor people who are not working and whose aid is going to end. The irony of it all the day after Christmas. But I'm still waiting to hear from McConnell to make me feel really good about this. I appreciate the market's enthusiasm, but we really need to see the stumbling block in the works here is to McConnell. If he's going to be on board and get the Republicans to back it. I do have a feeling, though, if he puts it on the floor, enough of them will back it with the full Democratic support, I would gather, to pass. It's just a matter of, will he put it on the floor? He hasn't suggested he will. And that is obviously what needs to be done at this point. So hopefully we're there. Hopefully it's just something we can agree on.
Yeah.
If they want to leave out the liability protection and the state aid at the moment, they can always get back to that in a new Congress.
Yeah.
But make sure these folks. I just drove by a dry cleaner that's going out of business. It's sad.
We had an interesting moment on Quick Take earlier today where we were talking to Steve Dennis, congressional reporter here at Bloomberg, and he mentioned that McConnell's embracing of President-elect Joe Biden this morning, which he did on the Senate floor, might have an effect on Trump's approval of a stimulus package. What does McConnell mean to him now?
Right, exactly. I think that was a really big step.
I think it was too, but it goes in the face of Trump and everything that Trump has been talking about with the election, because President Trump refuses to accept President-elect Biden.
Yeah, well, this is the difference between Trump and his supporters, I think, and kind of a lot of the Republican Party.
Right.
To some extent. Hey, Dave Wilson, come on in. I know you're listening to us talk politics. Politics certainly impact the trade. What are you seeing today?
Well, there's no question that politics is affecting the trade at the moment, because all you have to do is look at the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500. While they're all higher, it's, the kind of areas that we've seen pop up in the last few weeks as people anticipate that, the economy will start to revive even more than it has now. Certainly a stimulus package would help in that regard.
Right.
So, utilities are the best performers on the day. Set those aside. And then you see raw material producers, energy companies, financial stocks, industrials. We've been talking about them for weeks now as beneficiaries, as a shift toward, value rather than, the growth of big technology companies that have been leading the way for years in the market. So, what's going on today is certainly consistent with the idea that, yes, you're going to get something this time, and it will be good for the kinds of stocks that have been doing well recently and not having done well for years.
But, Dave, what does it mean if we don't get something? Because it's priced in that we do get something. What happens if we don't?
It just kind of bounces back and forth. I mean,
but a big bounce?
We've seen that scenario play out. But you figure, S&P 500 close to records. I mean, one thing that pops up is that, institutions don't necessarily kind of have the cash levels that they might have in the past because, they're putting money into the market, specifically stocks. So you still have that going on.
Yeah, Vince, I want to go back to what you were saying. I think about that every time I see a store close down, whether it's in the city or when I get closer to my home. Like I'm reminded that there is, it's people behind all of that. That's small business owners, and they are all, really having this really, really difficult time. And I can't imagine that all these members of Congress aren't, their constituents aren't saying, "Hey, I'm hurting," and you do wonder about what they are hearing from their supporters in terms of the need for more aid and assistance.
Yeah, no, and I think that'll swing the day. I mean, people like McConnell and some of the senators in the Midwest really pushing back because they think this is bailing out the states that have mismanaged their money. And there is a string of truth to that in the sense about, Chicago, for instance, just at the beginning of this year, inked a deal with the teachers union that was a huge a win for them. So people push back on that and say, look what you're doing in your local area, and you want the rest of the federal government to bail you out. But that said, that the argument in the reality doesn't hold water for what Dave was saying, and small businesses and people in need. You worry about the politics at a later date.
Correct.
This isn't politics. This is people. Right. And that needs to be done, and we need to get through this pandemic. We still are going to have a very tough winter ahead of us. Yeah. De Blasio is talking about shutting down the city and the day after Christmas. I have to believe the way Cuomo did an article for the New York Times over the weekend, basically said that New York could shut down in a month, and I think he's referring to the same time. Yeah. I think what they want to do is shut the economy, shut the cities down for the 2 weeks into January to give the virus an opportunity to pass, if you will, and people just sit it out for 2 weeks.
Right.
And then be able to bring people back. But we'll see if people listen and if they actually do it.
Right, exactly. And listen, it's what we've seen in certain countries, whether it's China specifically, it's basically you shut down, and people are not allowed kind of out in society. I mean, we're not China, and I understand that, but there is something to be said, right, Tim, that just those basic things of kind of just having people retrench, keep them out of society, basically, and prevent the virus from spreading.
I don't know if it's going to work, though.
I know.
Just because
I can see it in your face.
Well, just the relationship that we have with the virus now is so much different than it was in March and April. We know what we're comfortable with.
Yeah, and whether or not we're willing to go out. Yeah. Hey, guys, thank you so much. Vince Signorella, he's global macro strategist at Bloomberg News. Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg News. He's on the remote access from New Jersey. We'll hear from Dave a little bit later on the show with his chart and stock of the day. No, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, I don't know, because we know how to slow this, and we're gonna check in with Dr. Stephen Corwin, who's president and CEO of New York Presbyterian Hospital. I mean, they have been seeing all of this front and center. I remember the spring so well how difficult it was and the strains on the system, and I'm afraid we're going to get back there.
I'm worried we are too. And I'm also worried that there's just this fatigue that's set in, that people will be unwilling to make the sacrifice that is necessary to help stem the spread.
Or it's hard to make the sacrifice if you've got to go out and still make a living, right?
Yeah, it is.
All right, we've got a lot coming up. I mentioned Dr. Corwin, so we're looking forward to seeing what he has to say about the virus and the vaccine rollout. So we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's get the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day, one number that tells us a lot. Today's number, it is $1 billion. Eli Lilly, Tim, saying it will buy Prevail Therapeutics for about $1 billion to gain gene therapies that treat neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's. I think what's interesting is you're seeing companies and pharmaceutical companies, many focused on a vaccine, but they're making deals.
I was just going to say AstraZeneca news last week. Yeah. A lot of M&A in the space.
Yeah, exactly. And I bet more to come as they think about their futures. All right, let's get a check on world and national news. For that, it's over to D.C. and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. It's taken 6 weeks, but today Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell finally recognized Joe Biden as the president-elect.
Many millions of us had hoped the presidential election would yield a different result. But our system of government has processes to determine who will be sworn in on January the 20th. The Electoral College has spoken.
The tally from yesterday's Electoral College voting gives Joe Biden 306 votes to President Trump's 232. Well, Joe Biden has apparently decided who he wants to run the transportation department. Someone familiar with deliberations says he's picked former Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. Well, with Pfizer's vaccine already going into the arms of thousands of Americans, another vaccine is nearing approval. U.S. regulators today deemed Moderna's vaccine to be safe and effective for preventing COVID-19 in people 18 years of age and older. An FDA advisory panel will be reviewing those findings Thursday. Washington negotiators are still trying to map out another COVID-19 bill. Bloomberg contributor Rick Davis says the latest proposal comes from a bipartisan group and totals $748 billion.
This is not a stimulus bill. It is not going to go toward trying to put the country's economics on the right track. And so that business looks like it's going to be held over for the next Congress. And we'll see, based on the outcome of the Georgia elections coming up in the first week of January, who's in charge of that Congress.
Congressional leaders are meeting this afternoon. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, along with Tim Stanovic, Bloomberg Quick Take. And I know you guys, I mean, at 9, what did you lead with on your show on Quick Take?
Well, it was right after we learned about the next step in the Moderna vaccine. We had just gotten that data. So
you guys were leading with that.
We were leading with that early in the day.
Yeah, which makes sense, right? Here it is, another vaccine moving forward.
Yeah, and the big picture is it doesn't really change in terms of numbers, like who's going to actually get the shot and when they're going to get it by the end of the year.
Right.
And, the other thing about it is it's the same technology that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine uses, is mRNA technology. And in fact, when we look at Moderna, they've been working on this for a decade. And if you look at the ticker symbol, it's mRNA.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is exactly right. This is what they've been focusing on for a long time, which is another reminder that the science, while it's the first vaccine using this technology, they've been working on it for a long time. So it's something to kind of think about. It's funny because I was watching all of the kind of evening news network and the cable shows, and everybody was showing all the different people around the country getting the vaccine. Part of me thought, how quickly do these doses move? Because some of them were talking about, all right, there were like 400 here, a few thousand here, and I just thought, how quickly do we go through this next round, and how quickly are they, I'm assuming the supply will keep replenishing, but I just wonder how that supply chain might get gummed up at some point.
And remember, we need a second dose of this vaccine as well, so the Pfizer one and the Moderna one.
I don't know if you heard, I heard something coming out of the UK that they talked about a mutation also in the virus, although I think the current vaccine is still okay, but it just reminds us that there could be some obstacles to come.
Yeah, that was not great news to get yesterday. And that's one of the reasons why UK health officials actually think it's spreading so quickly in parts of London.
Exactly, right? And that's what they're worried about, that mutation. Listen, in London, they're trying to figure out how to kind of stem the surge that they're seeing. We did talk about New Jersey also getting its first COVID-19 vaccine administered. And again, our big headline here in the city is talking about maybe, again, a shutdown after Christmas.
Yeah, and that could come for the first couple of weeks of the new year. Is it the same as what we saw last time? I don't think so.
This is Bloomberg.
Okay, guys, I'm placing a new order to sell short Swiss franc at 0.886615. Just right here. Okay, let's see how long it will take until it will get executed. Position open for Swiss franc 0.88615. It's a short position. So anybody who followed the trade, they should know why position was opened, and let's wait until we'll get a profit. Yeah.
Here's where we stand. The S&P 500 index is up by 45 points now. That is a gain of 1.2%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 357, up 1.2%. NASDAQ up 120 points, up by 1%. 10-year yield 0.91%. Gold up 1.4%, rallying 25.50 the ounce to 18.52. And crude West Texas Intermediate up 0.7%, 47.30 a barrel. Bristol-Myers Squibb shares advancing after Goldman Sachs Group added the drug maker to its conviction buy list. Shares of Bristol-Myers Squibb up now by 4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, really appreciate that. We are up to date on the world of business. There's so much going on when it comes to a vaccine. Keep in mind, global coronavirus cases passing 73 million, deaths surpassing 1.62 million. For more on what he is seeing is Dr. Stephen Corwin. He's president and CEO of New York Presbyterian Hospital, who the New York Times called in the spring the CEO at the center of New York's coronavirus crisis. He, I should point out, the first confirmed case in the New York area was in one of New York Presbyterian's hospitals in southern Westchester. Dr. Corwin joining us on the phone in New York City. Dr. Corwin, thank you. So nice to have you here with Tim and myself. How are you, and what are you seeing when it comes to COVID cases right now?
Well, thanks, Carol and Tim, for having me on. We're seeing a significant increase in COVID cases. We're at about 25% of what our peak was in the April timeframe, and we expect it quickly to go to the 30-35% range by Christmas time, if not a little bit after. So we're seeing a significant uptick. The good news is that people are less sick with the virus as we see it. During April, we had a mortality rate in the hospital of about 20%. Extraordinary. Now it's down to about 5%, which is still horrific, especially if it's your loved one, but much less than April. So I would say we've got a rough 4 to 6 weeks ahead of us, but I think that we'll get through it, especially as we start vaccinating people.
Quick follow-up. Do you anticipate that we're going to get back to those levels in terms of hospitalizations and cases? Well, we are there, but in terms of hospitalizations that we saw back in the spring?
We hope not. We're clearly mindful of that. Our modeling would show that we would peak in the middle of January, unless we have a really terrible Christmas season in terms of people traveling and avoiding social distancing and masking. We still haven't seen the full peak of what happened in Thanksgiving. So that really is a variable that relates to this directly. So certainly no one wants to go back to where the city was in April, and we certainly don't. And so, again, until we get mass vaccination, masking, social distancing, washing your hands, all the things you keep hearing about become really critical. And I empathize with our elected officials in terms of how much of a lockdown do you need to have versus not. I think a lot of it depends on how much virus is circulating.
Dr. Corwin, Why is the mortality rate gone down so much? Is it because of what we've learned, what you've learned since March, since April? Is it because the hospital is not strained in the same way? Is it because of therapeutics?
I think first, the answer to your question is I really don't know, to be honest with you. I do think that we certainly know how to take care of the patients better. Remdesivir, steroids, they may not be game changers, but we know how to use these drugs. With the masking and social distancing, are people getting less of a viral load when they get sick? We've certainly seen a shift to a younger demographic who tends to be less sick with the virus. And to your point, any system that gets overwhelmed, it becomes more difficult to save lives. So the ability to not get the hospital overwhelmed, I think, plays into it as well. So all of the above, but it's going to take us a while to sort through this. The virus becoming less virulent, we don't see that, but that's going to take time for us to figure out.
One thing that you just said really struck me. People wearing masks, that you get less of a viral load. I haven't heard that before. What does that mean?
Well, remember, masks aren't totally effective, but it helps to filter out particles, and so we use the N95 masks when we're caring for patients, and that clearly prevents inhalation of the virus particles. So wearing a surgical mask not only protects the person that you would be breathing on, but also helps to protect you. And if you get less of a viral load, you may have a milder infection than if somebody gave you a full viral load, which is clearly what we saw in the beginning of the pandemic.
Right. It's so simple, but it does make a difference. Hey, what do you make, Dr. Corwin? A new mutation of COVID-19 turned up in, I guess, more than 1,000 infected patients in the UK and was being blamed for more rapid spread of the contagion. Does that make you a little nervous?
It does. I mean, I think that we know that the virus has many, many mutations. I mean, this is not the first one. When people went on holiday this summer, they came back with a variation from Spain, which appeared to be more virulent and caused wider spread. So this is not surprising. Viruses, like anything else, mutate over time. The fortunate aspect for us vis-a-vis the vaccine is the spike protein is the key in terms of inducing immunogenicity. And so knowing the spike protein and developing the mRNA towards the spike protein, I think we're in pretty good shape regardless of the variations now in terms of making sure that the vaccination will be very effective.
Right, because that's what I've heard, that the current vaccines still will work on these mutations. Is that correct?
That's correct. As far as I know, yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And I think that because the spike protein has not changed.
Right.
So it's not the mutation profile is not what we see in influenza, and I think that that's encouraging. And we're very bullish on the mRNA platform and the vaccine, both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine.
All right, Dr. Corwin, if you can just sit tight for a second. We have to do a little bit of world and national news, but we're going to come back. Dr. Corwin, what a great insight into terms of what's going on and just the different kind of pieces that we're hearing when it comes to the virus right now.
And look, great news about the vaccine.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear he's optimistic about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Stephen Corwin, we'll come back to him, President and CEO of New York Presbyterian Hospital, joining us on the phone in New York City. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovic, and this is Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 1061. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Master along with Tim Stanovic of Bloomberg Quick Take. We're going to get right back to Dr. Stephen Corin, President and CEO of New York Presbyterian Hospital. Such great insight, and obviously has seen so much, difficult times, and just giving us some great insight, Tim, on potentially what's to come.
Yeah, and then look, I mean, we'll get to him in a second. I was happy we left that interview, the first part of the interview, with optimism about the spike protein in the vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that. All right, let's get back to the world of business and Charlie Pellet.
And I thank you very much. Stocks are holding at the best level of the day on this Tuesday here, halting the longest slump since September. Speculation is mounting that Congress will agree on a federal spending package. S&P rebounding from a 4-day slide. Here's where we stand. The S&P up 44 now, as I mentioned, at or near session highs, a gain of 1.2%. We've got the Dow up 357, up 1.2%. NASDAQ up 121 now, higher by 1%, bringing its year-to-date gain now to 40%. The 10-year down 8/30 seconds, 10-year yield 0.91%. Gold up 1.4%, 18.52 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.4%, 47.63 a barrel. The FDA says Moderna's vaccine is safe and effective for preventing COVID-19, clearing the way for a second shot to quickly gain emergency authorization, an add to the country's sprawling immunization effort. Moderna shares, they are trading lower, though, right now. Moderna's down by 5.1%. Vaccines are rolling out across the U.S. Frontline healthcare workers and nursing home residents getting the very first shots. Dr. Amish Adalja is senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. He was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
So far, so good. But remember, this is when we're just kind of vaccinating healthcare workers and nursing home residents, so they're kind of a captive audience, much easier to do. Many healthcare workers can be vaccinated at hospitals where they don't have to worry as much about the cold chain. When the real challenge comes is when we're vaccinating people that live in the community and more of the general population. So right now, I suspect everything is going as expected. Hopefully, I'll be vaccinated by the end of this week.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the other vaccine names, Pfizer shares, they're trading lower as well today, down by 1.4%. BioNTech is up 1.9%, and AstraZeneca, the ADR, is up by 0.9%. Recapping, equities are trading higher, holding at session highs. S&P up 45, up 1.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Let's get right back to Dr. Stephen Corin, President and CEO of New York Presbyterian Hospital, on the phone in New York City. So, Dr. Corin, I want to ask you, when you were interviewing the Times back in May, you noted that our assumptions around pandemic preparations were flawed. Are there assumptions we are making right now about this wave of the COVID breakout, this other wave, another wave, and about the distribution of the vaccine and the impact that will have? Might some of those assumptions be flawed as well?
Well, anytime you're doing probabilistic analysis, there can always be flaws in the model. What I would say, though, is we grossly underestimated pre-pandemic the amount of protective equipment we would need for personnel protective equipment. We have over 90 days of supply for every major category of that. We had issues in terms of, do we have enough ventilators? We clearly don't have that issue now. We know how to create extra ICU beds, and we know how to create staffing models that protect our patients. So from that standpoint, we're much better off. Where I think that we can make a mistake as a country is to assume that the vaccine's here, we can let down our guard, and let's go back to business as usual. It's going to take a while for us to get to herd immunity, and so we've got to do two things simultaneously. Be really stringent about the guidelines and separating ourselves from each other, as tough as that may be, and let people get vaccinated and educate the population on the vaccine. We have a lot of the population is skeptical of the vaccine. Our populations of color who've been experimented upon in the past are skeptical of the vaccine. So we've really got to educate the population as to the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine. And then hopefully by the spring, we'll be at a point where we can really start to get out of this.
Dr. Corwin, I want to know about the hospital's finances and the financial health of the hospitals that you oversee. I know they took a big hit earlier this year with elective surgeries canceled and being put off, but how do they stand today?
Well, we're fortunate. Our balance sheet, we're AA rated. We have a very strong balance sheet. But on a base of $9 billion, we typically would have a margin of between 3 and 4%. We're going to lose close to $800 million this year.
Wow.
We had to put about $300 million into our employees, child care, bus service, meals, bonuses, and we're proud that we were able to do that. I think we'll get better next year, but a lot of it depends upon the economy coming back to normal and people being able to move about freely.
Well, and when do you think we will be moving around freely? Is it next summer? Is it next fall?
I hope by next summer we really see that. I hope that by May we've got mass vaccination. I think a lot of it depends, quite frankly, on the distribution mechanism of the vaccine, some of the storage issues with the vaccine. I think the incoming administration will be laser focused on making sure that we get the vaccine into arms, and I think that's really critical. The Pfizer vaccine, we're very happy to give because as an institution, we have plenty of freezer storage for minus 80 degrees. That's much more challenging if you're trying to give vaccine in the community. The Moderna vaccine is easier to store, and some of the later vaccines will be easier to store. But I think that's going to be a challenge for us logistically.
Hey, just got about a minute left. When does the mass public, what's the rollout look for the rest of us eventually when that comes? Is it that you're going to get a call from your doctor, or they're going to call up people based on age? How are they going to do it? What do we know about that, if anything, at this point?
I think you have to assume that what's going to happen is once we do the healthcare workers and the nursing home residents, you'll have a balancing act between essential workers and then people over the age of 70, maybe over the age of 65, and people with significant comorbid conditions. If you're a healthy 35-year-old, you're going to be towards the end of that line, if you will. So I think you're going to be talking about age, comorbidities, and essential workers. And we know that our essential workers are at risk, whether you're working in the subway, a grocery store, whether you're a longshoreman, whether you're a truck driver. So I think that's really critical for us to get the economy going better.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Corwin, thank you so much. I know things are crazy and you're busy, so that you carved out so much time for us. Thank you so much. Be well and stay safe for you and your team and your families. Dr. Stephen Corwin, he's president and CEO of New York Presbyterian, joining us on the phone in New York City. All right, let's get to world and national news. For that, it's over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is now accepting Joe Biden's victory after yesterday's results from the Electoral College, showing Biden with 306 votes, well over the needed 270.
The Electoral College has spoken. So today I want to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden. The President-elect is no stranger to the Senate. He's devoted himself to public service for many years.
McConnell had declined to acknowledge Biden's win until now, saying that President Trump was entitled to pursue his claims in court. Well, more Americans are being vaccinated today. A second vaccine is a step closer to approval by week's end. And scientists are lending their voices to persuade one and all to be vaccinated when their turn comes. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has more from Washington.
Vaccine development may have been rushed, but the testing on thousands of volunteers has not been. Robert Califf, former commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, said in a Bloomberg interview.
Everything that happened was recorded. It's there in the public view. It's been analyzed independently by the FDA. people should really be comfortable that this is a safe and effective vaccine. We'll see a gradual reduction in the transmission of the virus as the number of people who are vaccinated increases.
In the interim, Dr. Califf said wearing masks and social distancing will continue to save lives. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Lawmakers still working on a COVID relief bill. They'll be meeting this afternoon to discuss the latest proposal, totaling $748 billion. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar, along with Tim Stanovic of Bloomberg Quick Take. And Tim, man, I feel like this is the conversations we constantly have about, you know, we watch the market hitting records. We talk about companies, especially those big tech companies, the FANG stocks, individuals who are making money and not really feeling a lot of the economic impact of the virus.
Yeah, I mean, one of those people is Mackenzie Scott, formerly Mackenzie Bezos.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, who announced today that she's donated $4.1 billion to more than 350 groups in the last few months.
Which is really, really impressive. Right. 384 organizations across all 50 states, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C. She put out a Medium post, and she says this pandemic has been a wrecking ball in the lives of Americans already struggling. Economic losses and health outcomes alike have been worse for women, for people of color, and for people living in poverty. So kudos that she is, you know, spreading around her wealth to help those that are less fortunate. She is the world's 18th richest person. I have to say, in this story by our Sophie Alexander, she's got Scott does, a $60.7 billion fortune, which is from a 4% stake in Amazon.com. And she got that from her divorce. Her wealth, though, this is the number that just was like, whoa. Her wealth has risen $23.6 billion this year.
Because of Amazon's stock price increase and market cap increase, as the company has just fared this pandemic so well. This gift that she's given in the last few months, these gifts, they build on this idea that she put out earlier this year, where she said that she would have this team of advisors. And one thing that I found fascinating about this is that in her post on Medium, which is actually like a really long post, she goes into the details of why and how she chose these organizations, which I hope has the idea, and maybe she thinks the same thing, to inspire others to give to these organizations.
Yeah, so give some kind of, it's more meat and just saying, here, I'm just putting out this money, but here's why, and here's what they're doing, which is really, really, I feel like the more information we have, hopefully it'll spur others to do that. Interesting. Check it out at Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks continue to hold at session highs. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all rallying by 1.1% or more. Let's get right to the numbers. I'll give you the why in a moment here with the S&P up 47 now at 3695, up 1.3%. The Dow's up 372, also up 1.3%. NASDAQ's up 130 points. That is a gain of 1.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index up by 0.9%. Dow Transports, they're up by 1.1%. Stocks have halted the longest slump since September. Speculation is mounting that Congress will agree on a federal spending package. S&P rebounding from a 4-day slide. Again, recapping, we do have equities higher across the board here. 10-year yield 0.92%. Gold up 1.4%, 18.52 the ounce. Crude up 1.4%, 47.62 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic, and we love Sean Donnan, yes, for his reporting, and especially when he can weave in the 1968 zombie classic Night of the Living Dead to tell a really weighty story about the American economy facing a zombie recovery. I know you caught up with him over on Quick Take earlier today.
We did earlier, and Carol, we're going to get to Sean and Joel in just a sec, but I mean, this story, it puts a name in a story to the people who have been affected by the pandemic and by the lack of movement in Washington, which is something we talk about all the time, but we don't meet the people who've been affected.
Right, really like drilling down, and that's what Sean is so good at. Let's bring in Sean. He's Bloomberg News Senior Trade and Globalization Reporter reporting for Bloomberg Business Week. He is with us on the phone in Maryland, along with Bloomberg Business Week editor Joel Weber on the Access line in Brooklyn. And Joel, it's just a reminder, we talk about these big macro stories, but it's people, it's companies, it's small businesses behind it all.
Yeah, and Sean's been like singularly focused and obsessed with Pennsylvania for several months, and for good reason.
I'm placing a stop on profit for Swissy from this position at 1.88585. Okay, 5. Right here, okay?
Sean.
Well, I didn't find any zombies. It's actually turns out been a bad year for zombies, like a lot of us. The Living Dead Museum and Gift Shop in Evans City, which was there to take advantage of tourists who come from around the world to visit this place, which kind of gave birth to the American zombie genre, has shut down. And it's shut down because of the pandemic, and so it is no longer. It's not been a good year for zombies. I think, this story is as I was thinking about this story, I was really thinking about not so much the people who've felt the most extreme impact of the economic side of the pandemic, those who've lost their job, those who have joined the bread lines, those who have really or lost loved ones.
A close position at 0.88585.
Beforehand, and that's really what you find in Butler County, which is home to Evans City. It's a suburban county of Pittsburgh. It at the aggregate level looks like a place that is doing better than the rest of America. When it comes to unemployment, certainly. The unemployment rate there in October was 5.9%, which is a full percentage point better than the national rate was in October. And yet you scratch the surface and you discover all of these people who are surviving in a world of kind of curtailed ambitions. The guy who ran the Living Dead Museum and Gift Shop in Evans City started the year thinking he was going to be expanding his business. Instead, he's shutting down that location in Evans City. You go down the street and you talk to people who run one of the local sports bars there. Business is down 60%. You wander short distance out of town and you run into a company called FiberCon, which makes these little bits of steel that give the kind of reinforced concrete. If you're building a factory floor, you're going to be using those little bits of steel. Their business is down by a third. And you find that same story over and over again in Butler County and in a lot of places in America right now. And that's the kind of that grind, that economic grind that we're stuck in right now.
Yeah, I want to stay on that theme because one of the companies that you spoke to was Ed Beans Incorporated. This is a coffee roaster in Cranberry Township, and they own a regional chain of coffee shops called Crazy Mocha. They did get more than $500,000 in a PPP loan back in April, but it wasn't enough, right?
Yeah, and and that's one of the themes that I think is kind of front of mind right now here in Washington as Congress is debating a new rescue package that will include hopefully help for small businesses. Is that money that went out in the spring kind of helped a lot of small businesses get through a few months. And if you think back to March and April and May, at that time we thought this thing was going to be with us for maybe 3 or 4 months, and really the priority was on getting companies through that. Well, Crazy Mocha got into the fall and discovered that business had not bounced back. Those office workers had not returned to work. It relies on them to buy coffee, and in October it filed for bankruptcy and it stopped paying rent. It's got it's 7 of its 23 locations are still open and kind of crawling along. But that's probably something that we should be thinking about more as a leading indicator, really. And a lot of economists worry that while we haven't seen a big surge in bankruptcies this year, we could see it next year unless we get the economy back on track. Because right now the economy is really reliant on this kind of injection of fiscal health, this fiscal stimulus that's come from Congress, and it needs more of it to get back to normal life.
Speaking of normal life, what do people like Kevin Crease, who's the owner of the Living Dead Museum, what are his plans now? And does he hope that he's going to be able to reopen? What's that look like for people who have had to shutter and are trying to figure out the future?
Yeah, so a big part of Kevin Crease's life was travel. He made his money as the zombie guy at a lot of fan fests around the country and industry conventions, selling zombie T-shirts and other bits of memorabilia. He also staged an annual festival every year, which relied on people coming in. You talk to him, he's got some other businesses selling other kinds of memorabilia online. He'll survive, but the zombie business, he really needs people to be back and traveling again and be comfortable traveling again and hanging out in crowds, because that's how he makes his business.
I mean, bottom line, Sean, as we look at and these small businesses that you talk to, and as you write in your story, and you mentioned earlier, even, the well-known companies of corporate America, the big publicly held companies, they've been taking on a lot of debt. And there might be some tricky spots in terms of servicing that debt. So there are a lot of questions about what 2021 might look like. And we've just got about 35 seconds here.
Yeah, and the simple answer to that is you need demand to come back in the U.S. economy. I think, we in the last half of this year, we bought into this narrative, and financial markets certainly bought into this narrative that we were bouncing back, that the recovery was going gangbusters. Well, we've seen that slow down as cases have surged in the last couple of months, and the U.S. economy is going to, and this is really something that stops me every time I think about it, is going to end this year 5% smaller. It's more than $1 trillion smaller than it would have been otherwise if we had not had a pandemic.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. All right, thank you guys so much. That was Bloomberg News senior trade and globalization reporter Sean Donnan reporting for Bloomberg Business Week, along with Bloomberg Business Week editor Jill Weber. And for those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business is coming up next.
I'm placing another stop on profit for Swiss franc for second position at 0.88565. Just right here.
Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this Tuesday, December 15th. Stocks holding close to session highs. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing now by 1.1% or more. Stocks heading back to records as Congress moves towards a federal spending package that would boost the economy. S&P up 44 now, up 1.2%. The Dow up 341, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 130, up by 1.1%. 10-year down 730 seconds, 10-year yield 0.91%. Gold up 1.4%, 18.52 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, 47.60 a barrel. The European Central Bank says it will allow some banks to resume partial dividend payments next year while urging them to maintain financial reserves to weather the pandemic. That word from ECB Chairman Andrea Enria, who spoke with Bloomberg Television.
The important signal is the opening to dividend payments, and we also gave forward guidance that basically we intend to repeal this recommendation in September when, let's say, when it will come to an end. So we are going back to the ordinary situation in which supervisors will vet the dividend payments decisions by banks in the normal supervisory process on a bank-specific basis.
Peter Warzak, CEO of Lazard's advisory business and budget director under former President Barack Obama, says the economy will face a range of troubles through the middle of next year as COVID-19 rages on. He spoke with Bloomberg Television and Radio this morning. He also talked about the outlook for the American consumer.
American households basically have $1 trillion more now than they did about a year ago, which is a remarkable statement given that we have gone through a pandemic in the meanwhile. So what you might see after the vaccine is widely available is a spurt of activity in 2021. That doesn't mean that there's no scarring or long-term harm from the lagged effects of the recession.
Apple said to be seeing robust demand for its iPhone 12 models, according to a Nikkei Asia report. Shares up now by 4.5%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 46, up 1.3%. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser on Bloomberg Radio.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. It is Tuesday. A lot going on. Carol Masser along with Tim Stanovic of Bloomberg Quick Take. And one of our top stories, I think it's safe to say, Tim, is it actually started late yesterday when we got news of Bill Barr and his resignation.
Yeah. Did that surprise you?
No, I think after...
Yeah, you were prepared for it. After that interview he gave to the Associated Press earlier this month, right?
Yeah, and basically saying no fraud that he found in terms of the election, right?
Right,
and
yeah.
that, was kind of, I think, surprising to so many of us.
This is a little bit of like how the sausage is made, but we were kind of taking bets last week if it was going to happen Friday night.
But it didn't.
It didn't. It happened. It happened Monday night.
So let's get into it, what it means, what that resignation means, and what it means for a Justice Department under Barr's handpicked deputy. So let's bring in Chris Strom. He's national security reporter at Bloomberg News. He's with us on the phone in Washington, D.C. Chris, great to have you here with us. So tell us what does it mean, and what might we see out of the Justice Department specifically, or what we might see from President Trump?
Well, I think you two are right in the sense that the writing was kind of on the wall here. I mean, let's face it, the administration is ending, and so Barr was going to be leaving no matter what. But, I think, Barr wanted to go out on his own terms. It seems that even some of what Trump was doing and plans to do is just a bridge too far for Barr. And, the two had a falling out over the last several weeks, especially around the election stuff, around, whether to appoint a special prosecutor to go after Hunter Biden. And, they weren't seeing eye to eye. And Barr wanted to go out on his own terms. And so he made the decision that he's going to resign. And, he's basically getting out before, the next wave of
a close position on Swiss franc at 0.88565.
What does he inherit, and what does he have time to actually do or not do before Biden becomes president?
Yeah, so Rosen is viewed as being a government bureaucrat, a career lawyer, not necessarily a political animal. But he is deferential, and he is expected to be deferential to things that Trump wants to do. For example, we're most likely going to see Trump move forward with some really controversial pardons, and normally that goes through the Justice Department. Trump doesn't have to go through the Justice Department, but he's probably going to want, the Attorney General to publicly give a stamp of approval to these pardons. And that seems like something that Rosen would do. Now, one of the big questions is if Trump tries to pardon himself, if Trump wants to pardon himself, how does Rosen respond to that? I think that's going to be a really controversial matter. And if Trump also wants the Justice Department to issue a legal opinion saying that Trump can pardon himself, that's something that Rosen is going to have to face and is going to have to make a decision about whether he would do that.
Do you have any indications of how he might lean on something, or what kind of decision he might make on something like that?
Well, I think that Rosen is going to be deferential to Trump.
You did say that, yeah.
I think that, on most of the matters before him, he's going to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, publicly support what Trump is doing. Another major controversy is going to be whether to appoint any new special counsel, such as to look into election fraud or to look into Hunter Biden. And here, I think that Rosen is going to, kind of survey what the evidence is, and if he can see a justification for appointing a special counsel, particularly in the Hunter Biden case, I think that he would do that. On the election fraud stuff, because Barr and the Justice Department have already said that they found no evidence of widespread fraud that would overturn the election, I think that, Rosen would probably stand in the ground where Barr was and not do something like that.
What's next for Bill Barr? And why is it that, he wanted to make sure he got out ahead of all of this?
Well, Barr does care about his reputation. He'll probably go and do more private consulting and eventually, just end up, retired. And, but I think that Barr is very aware of, the way that his legacy is being perceived. It's not going to be kind to him. There's going to be a lot of criticism that's going to come down on him in the coming years. That he bent the Justice Department to the political will of Trump, and that he didn't stand up for the independence of the Justice Department. I think that he wanted to go out on his own terms, and he didn't want to be associated with some of the controversial stuff that's going to come down in the next month.
I was still surprised given the timing of this. I mean, I wasn't surprised after the interview, but the fact that he's still going to be Attorney General until next week. There were some jokes going around on Twitter last night that, maybe he's Santa Claus, because it said that he wants to leave, on the 23rd to spend the holidays with his family.
And then go out and
exactly.
Get on the sleigh.
What does it mean for the way that he's changed the office of Attorney General? Very briefly.
I think that, it means that the Biden administration is going to be faced with a serious challenge to restore the credibility and independence of the Justice Department. Barr, has tarnished that reputation, and Biden is going to have to deal with that.
Yes, indeed. All right. What?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just like, what is Rosen going to get done in 3 weeks,
I don't
4
know,
weeks?
but I think it does put, I don't know, we'll all be watching, right?
Yeah.
But it makes, I think, everybody just a little bit nervous about what maybe is to come.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Chris Strom, thank you so much. National security reporter at Bloomberg News on the phone from Washington, D.C. You know, it's just a reminder, right? The transition is happening, but yet, you know, we still have a president and his administration still in charge. We still have a month to go.
The message is clear. It's not too late to get fired.
It's not.
If you're thinking that you made it this far.
Exactly.
If you made it this far with
that's
Trump,
what I
it's
think
not
was
too late to get
interesting.
fired.
I think to some extent it was like, well, wait a minute, we're almost there.
Yeah.
But definitely looking to get out ahead of it. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic. Coming up, we're going to get to, I think it is still our most read story on the Bloomberg. It has to do with Wall Streeters and working from home. Yep, it's the most read in the past 8 hours. We'll get to that story in just a minute. Let's get back, though, to world and national news. Back on over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hi, Nancy.
Hey, Carol. Well, the pace is intensifying as Washington negotiators try to reach agreement on COVID-19 relief. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has summoned other top congressional leaders for a potentially critical meeting this afternoon. Pelosi spoke with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin for more than an hour earlier today, and Mnuchin will be joining the meeting by phone. Republicans are finally acknowledging Joe Biden as president-elect, with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell addressing it on the Senate floor today.
Yesterday, electors met in all 50 states. So as of this morning, our country has officially a president-elect and a vice president-elect.
He went on to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Well, now that Joe Biden is officially president-elect after that Electoral College victory, he's back on the campaign trail in Georgia, hoping to lift the 2 Democrats in 2 Senate runoffs. But before leaving on that trip, Biden was asked when he might be taking the COVID-19 vaccine.
Dr. Fauci recommends I get the vaccine sooner than later. I wanted to make sure we do apply the numbers, and we do it. But when I do it, you'll have notice, and we'll do it publicly.
Biden has chosen Pete Buttigieg to be his transportation secretary. That's according to those familiar with deliberations. Buttigieg was a former candidate for the presidential nomination and is the first of Biden's opponents after Kamala Harris to be offered a job in the new administration. If confirmed, Buttigieg would become the first openly gay member of a president's cabinet. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
All right, I've been kind of nuts about this story, and I think it is among our most read stories on the Bloomberg today as well. And it has to do with the private equity giant. We're talking about Blackstone Group, and it talks about, listen, they have a very interesting, first of all, this is Bloomberg Business Week, Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic, but they have an interesting view on the global economy because they have investments in a lot of different companies. Specifically, they've got stakes in about 97 companies through all of its private equity funds. And now what they're basically saying, and some say that this is just kind of looking for another revenue stream because of these investments, that unique view on the economy, they're thinking, okay, maybe we package it and sell data from companies that it acquires in future deals. And so basically providing insight into industries, really economic industries. Think about all of the data that they're getting and what they can do with it.
What do they say about data, Carol, right? Data is the new oil.
It is the new oil, and it's just kind of fascinating.
It really is. I mean, this idea of alternative
Bloomberg
data
Radio
has
on
come up a lot in when thinking about hedge funds, because the idea is what gives you the edge.
Right, the advantage, right?
The advantage that other investors and other hedge funds don't have. And if you can get alternative data, crunching credit card data, looking at geolocation data for, parking lots and
Flying
how full
over
they
things,
are.
right?
Exactly. And that's sort of just the tip of the iceberg here, because if you think about the data that comes from all these different companies, if they could use that, that would be a big deal.
Right, exactly. And it's just a reminder, all the data that's being collected on each and every one of us, it's not just, ones and zeros, right? It's got value to it, and people can sell it and package it in different ways. And apparently they did an SEC filing, and that's where this plan has been exposed. It's exploratory, and I guess they're figuring out what they want to do, but there is so much value in data. And I think we're going to find out in the next few decades, how we deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a great point, because there could be some regulatory issues and some regulatory questions about what to do and what is okay to do with that data.
Right. And
just like tech companies are experiencing.
Right. And do we get compensated for some of that in some ways?
Yeah, come on.
Come on. Just saying.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are trading near session highs. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. And here is Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks trading in the green, helped by the vaccine rollout and stimulus talks. Dow's currently up 358 points. S&P's gained 46. NASDAQ climbs by 135. The U.S. 10 yield at 0.92%. Gold is up 24. And transports gain 123 points. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, all were in the green, led by gains in energy and the materials. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, Apple and Disney, while Salesforce led to the downside. In other news, McConnell says the U.S. officially has a president-elect, and the Moderna vaccine is 80% effective in people aged 65 and over. In deal news, Cardtronics to be acquired for $35 a share. And wrapping things up, Nordson reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, we thank you very much, Bill, and to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg Type Squawk SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. It is Tuesday. I'm Carol Masser, along with my co-host, Tim Stenovic, a Bloomberg Quick Take. And Tim, I want to do one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg today. It's about how all across Wall Street, the reality is kind of sinking in. Even though we're seeing progress in terms of a vaccine, those folks are going to be working from home for some time.
Big question is,
what?
Is that home in New York? Or is it in Florida?
Yeah, there is that question because we know all of those things are at play. Hey, let's bring in this story. It was written by Bloomberg's Jenny Serrain and Michelle Davis. Joining us right now is Jenny. She's finance reporter at Bloomberg News. She's on the phone in New York City. So, Jenny, tell us about the reporting you and Michelle have been doing, who you're talking to and what you're finding out.
So it seems like, after most of the summer, we heard from lots of the world's biggest banks that they were really looking to bring back a lot of their employees to their New York and U.S. offices more broadly. They've really had to taper back. So they've already started to see employees kind of thin out. Some have actually told employees, if it's not absolutely essential for you to be here, we want you to stay home. And for some, it's just the employees themselves saying, you know what, I've got holiday plans. I want to stay put.
What changed? Is it the fact that this wave is so much worse than, well, I won't say that everyone thought, because a lot of people thought it was going to be this bad.
Right.
But these banks, as you said, were optimistic about getting people butts in seats, as they say, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that changed is really, as the vaccine has actually made its way here and we're starting to see the initial stages of rollout, I think banks have really come to terms with the fact that their employees are not first in line. It's really healthcare workers and residents in these long-term care facilities that are going to be getting it, at least in this initial round. And so I think as they've come to accept that and just kind of seen how bad this wave really was, it's kind of led executives to maybe pump the brakes a little bit in terms of the messaging around coming back to the office.
Jenny, how many had really come back, though? Because the city has felt pretty quiet. So I'm just curious, how many at the big Wall Street banks really had come back to the office?
So the rough numbers that we're hearing is that most places didn't see more than a quarter of people return. So even though there was lots of messaging and lots of pushing maybe from managers, that 25% number kept coming up in a lot of our conversations. And I think, a lot of that was also for the employees. If they did come back, a lot of them maybe didn't see a real value just because the offices were so empty. So they were doing Zoom calls all day anyways. So it's definitely kind of that vicious cycle after a little bit where if not enough people are back, then more people don't really want to come in.
Yeah.
How flexible are these banks as to where people are actually working? I mean, I was joking with Carol, is this happening in Florida, or is it happening in Westchester where these employees live?
Right.
Are they allowing them to actually travel to places where they don't live, or are there some sort of, encouragement to be close to the office?
We haven't heard as much of that for New York. Definitely, in Europe, if employees were in different countries, then they were being asked to come back. But we haven't heard as much of that pressure here in New York. But I mean, I do think, especially for younger employees, they were told, you need to start coming back. We want you to be in the city so that you're able to come in as soon as we're able to have you. So I think there was maybe not as much pressure as we saw in other regions, but still definitely that pressure did exist for a little bit of time at least.
Traders are back?
That was definitely who was in the first round of folks.
And they've stayed, I'm assuming, right?
Well, I think the banks have really learned that they can operate a trading floor with only a handful of people in the office. And so I think that's what we're going back to now.
What are the long-term implications of a finding like that? I mean, does that mean headcount gets lowered?
No, I think the long-term implication is just flexibility. Like, I think it used to be that if a trader, had a plumber coming, they had to take the day and had to be off. And now I think they'll be able to just work from home on those days.
I mean, we're talking about places where people still wear suits and ties, right? Like, flexibility is not really in their, vocabulary, right?
Right. So I think that will be the change for a lot of these folks. Is I think in the end, a lot of them will still go back to the office 5 days a week, especially on the trading floor. But I just think there will be the option that they can work from home more often, at least from the conversations we're having so far.
How much, Jenny, is JP Morgan watching Citigroup, watching Bank of America, watching Wells or whatever? Like, how much are they all kind of watching one another to figure out what they are doing?
I think so. There's definitely, different forums where executives from these banks come together and talk about this stuff. But I honestly think a lot of it, you see it in the different messaging that you're getting from these banks. Citi was an example where they were really cautious and they didn't put as much pressure maybe as some of their peers did. They were fine with people, if they wanted to work from home, if that's where they felt safe, that was fine by them. Obviously, some other banks, they were a little bit more strongly pushing people to come back, especially their senior traders. So I definitely think you see a difference in tone, which definitely indicates, they operate separately, obviously, and have different thoughts on this. But there are those forums, I think, where if one has discovered, one way to operate a trading floor more safely, then they'll share that information in due course.
All right, going to leave it there. Hey, Jenny, thank you so much. Jenny Serrain, finance reporter at Bloomberg News, on the phone in New York City. I love that idea, Tim, though, and I think people think about it. It's like, if nobody else is in the office and I'm just going to be at my office computer doing a Zoom conference call with everybody else who's still at home, why should I come in? No, seriously, you think about that. It's like...
Well, I think also you run into the issue of what happens if you need to join a Zoom call and you're at the office and someone else is at the office and you're doing it in this conference room, but then you're not all allowed to be in the conference room together. So there are actually like logistical challenges to who goes into the office and who stays home.
Well, and we think about it when we come in here. It's like you cannot be sitting next to colleagues and so on and so forth. So things are spread out. Anyway, it is our most read story on the Bloomberg for the past 8 hours. It will probably end up being one of the most read stories for the week, no doubt about it, because Wall Street loves reading about Wall Street, and it makes sense. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Coming up, the chart of the day. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser and Tim Stenovic of Bloomberg Quick Take. Just about 29 minutes to go in today's trading day, but we've got the chart of the day coming up.
The chart of the day, which also means it's the most embarrassing moment of the day for me.
You're doing better.
Well,
I actually think you're doing well.
Dave's going more easy on me, so.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
He felt bad last week.
Okay, we'll see what happens right now. We'll get to Dave Wilson in just a moment. Let's get back to your top business stories. Once again, here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. We are still close to session highs, but we are seeing a fade right now. As you mentioned, 28 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell here. Stocks trading close to records. Congress, though, moving toward a federal spending package that would boost the economy. Certainly that idea boosting optimism today. Let's get right to the numbers with the S&P up now by 39, a gain of 1.1%. The Dow up 297 points, up by 1%. NASDAQ up 129, up by 1%. We've got the 10-year yielding 0.90%. Gold is up 1.4% at $18.52 the ounce. Gold rallying $25 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, $47.54 for a barrel of WTI. Oil, by the way, surging to the highest in nearly 10 months, alongside a broader market rally as breakthroughs on stimulus talks combined with the COVID-19 vaccine rollout stoke optimism around a demand revival. The FDA says Moderna's vaccine is safe and effective for preventing COVID-19, clearing the way for a second shot to quickly gain emergency authorization and add to the country's sprawling immunization effort. Moderna shares, they're down today, however, by 5.8%. Vaccines are rolling out across the country. Frontline healthcare workers, nursing home residents getting the first shots. Dr. Amish Aldalja is senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and he says, sadly, the vaccinations are not going to help during the holiday season.
It's going to be rough no matter how we look at it, because this vaccine isn't going to have an impact on the patients that are at the hospital today, tomorrow, or next week. And what we know is that we are at record numbers of hospitalizations, and we have a very uncontrolled outbreak all throughout this country. So we do anticipate more people getting hospitalized, more people dying, and hospitals really struggling on a day-to-day basis, worrying about their capacity, worrying about their staffing. So I think it's going to be a dark several weeks ahead.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the other vaccine names that we keep an eye on, Pfizer down 1.6%. Germany's BioNTech up 2.3% today. The ADRs of AstraZeneca out of London up by 0.9%. Again, recapping, equities higher, off session highs right now with the S&P up 39, up 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg Radio.
Because this is like 90s, right?
Right.
This is 90s. This is my vintage. Like, this is when I was reading Rolling Stone.
Is this Foo Fighters?
It is.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Dave Wilson, you have no faith in us.
You're right.
That's amazing, Carol.
That's good, Carol.
I should have known that.
Dave Grohl,
yeah,
the leader of Foo Fighters, has been so ubiquitous lately. It'd be hard to miss him. You know, whether it was the...
Are you taking away from me guessing?
No,
really,
I'm
you
just saying.
Oh, okay,
that,
okay.
You know, I mean, it's a reasonable guess. You know, think about it. He's had this video drum battle with a 10-year-old British girl.
I know. I love it.
You know, and lately,
what a good guy.
You know, recording another guy doing some classics. I saw a version of Mountains, Mississippi Queen the other day that he collaborated with someone on. So he's out there. He's trying to make the best of it during the pandemic and keep his profile and the band's profile up there. And they got a new album out, too. So there you go.
I love everybody putting out new music. I mean, they've got time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not just Taylor Swift.
It's not just Taylor Swift,
man. I mean,
she's amazing.
Somebody was asking her, like, do you have a third album in there? Because there was something in, like, some art graphic, and they saw another, like, name for an album, and she's like, no. And she...
I just want, when's Dave going to play some Taylor Swift for us?
Yeah.
good question. In any case,
okay, so what do you got?
Why that song?
Yes,
Let's get to that part of the discussion. You know, it's the chart focuses on what are called call options. You know, the idea is you buy a contract that rises with the value of a stock or a stock index or whatever, basically. And it's something that the folks at Charles Schwab picked up on in a blog post that they put out on Friday, looking specifically at equity-related call options. So we're talking about stocks, individual shares, and stock indexes. And the volume in these contracts has just exploded this year. They looked at a 20-day moving average, which just sort of smooths things out. So, you know, you're taking like average daily trading over the course of about a month. And if you look at that indicator, you know, as of Monday, the average was 22.5 million contracts a day. You go back to the end of last year, it was 11 million. So in other words, the number of call options traded on a daily basis has doubled this year.
Dave, is this...
You see nothing like that. The chart goes back to 2010, but even if you were to extend it back further, which you can do, there's never been a period like this.
Is this thanks to retail investors playing around on Robinhood, or is this bigger?
Probably sort of a combination. Certainly what individual investors have been doing is part of the mix, because it's a lot cheaper in many cases to buy an option than it is to buy a stock. I mean, just that's sort of the nature of the beast. But beyond that, I mean, you know, there's been reporting in the past few months about Japan's SoftBank being active in this market. So there's probably an institutional element as well. But put it all together, and Schwab says this increase is really a sign of rampant speculation in U.S. shares. And I guess for that reason, I put that phrase in the headline. This has been one of my most popular charts lately on the Bloomberg terminal. So if you haven't seen it, get me an email. I'll send it to you with the explanation that goes with it and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
Got to say, Dave, it's a pretty impressive chart. And like you say, just kind of they're moving along, and then there's a big spike. But, you know, is it the idea that investors are just overwhelmingly bullish? And that's so it's okay.
That's how Schwab
make sure I'm reading it right. Right.
Now, there's probably more than one way to read it, but Schwab certainly going from that perspective is that, you know, if they're throwing money at contracts like this, which, you know, they don't necessarily pay off. In fact, you know, an option can be worth nothing in the end.
Right.
You know, it just shows you how much demand there is to be in the stock market at this point.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to the idea of the Robinhood traders over the summer, not watching sports, learning about call options, having maybe stimulus checks, and, you know, making bets.
Here's the thing, though, Tim, if you actually look at this chart in the past few weeks, the numbers have picked up from summer.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, look at that.
There's a lot more momentum, just people out there. Well, I don't know. It's been a year where, you know, there have been a lot of big moves on a lot of names, and that certainly provides opportunities for investors, even retail investors. All right, Dave Wilson, thank you so much. Dave will be along a little bit later on with his stock of the day. Right now, back to world and national news. Back on over to D.C. and Nancy Lyons. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol, the push is on to complete another round of COVID-19 relief before lawmakers leave Washington for the year. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is committed to getting it done.
We're not leaving. I assure you, we're not leaving until we finish this package.
McConnell wants to move forward on items that have broad agreement and put aside some contentious issues like liability protections and aid to state and local governments. He'll be discussing the targeted approach this afternoon with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Well, President-elect Joe Biden is about to kick off a rally for two Democratic candidates in Georgia. Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock are facing the Republican senators in a runoff next month. It's a critical election as it'll decide which party controls the Senate. Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci is encouraging Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris to be vaccinated quickly with the coronavirus vaccine.
For security reasons, I really feel strongly that we should get them vaccinated as soon as we possibly can. You want him fully protected as he enters into the presidency.
Well, it looks like the pandemic will result in a scaled-back inauguration. The inaugural planning committee says Biden will take the oath of office and give his address from the west side of the Capitol as usual. But just about everything else will be reimagined. Attendance on the platform will be limited. The inaugural parade will be mostly virtual, and the transition team is urging Americans to watch from home. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday. Carol Massar along with Tim Stanovic of Bloomberg Quick Take. I feel like these are the kinds of conversations we've been having throughout the year. This story actually specifically by the team over at Dow Jones Wall Street Journal, asking the question, does COVID-19 spread on buses and subways? And New York City wants to find out. I think it's a big, important question.
It's a very important question, and the thing is, as this article points out, is that there have been conflicting reports over to what extent, if at all, it can be passed on in these spaces when people are wearing masks. We've heard about the ventilation, we've heard about air circulation, but at the core, Carol, is how people feel and how safe they feel about riding. And it's when it comes to the public transit, not just here in New York, but around the world, it relies on ridership to support it and sustain it. So if people are not comfortable, they ride it less, they cut service, it becomes this terrible cycle, and that's where we are now.
Yeah, so they're trying to figure out, listen, I think you're so right about this whole confidence, whether it's getting on a plane, whether it's coming to your office, whether it's going shopping, whether it's doing, you name it, and certainly getting on a bus or subway. You've got to feel comfortable, you've got to feel confident, and you need to make sure that that system is safe and clean. And so that's what they're trying to tackle. And I think employers have tried to do that. Like, what do I need to do to bring my workers back so that they feel safe? And a big concern has been mass transportation. And for anybody in the New York metro area, the majority use some form of mass transportation.
It's because it's the best, and the subway is the great equalizer because it's the best way to get places. It has everybody, whether you're a billionaire or whether you're not. You're riding the subway because it's the fastest. Well, not anymore.
Right, exactly. We've had a lot of conversations with very wealthy people who probably have cars that take them everywhere, but they're like, no, I get on the subway because if I've got to go across town, that's the only way I can do it quickly.
And it's a real shame that the city could take such a big hit that subway service in New York was getting better.
Yeah.
Until this.
Right, exactly. So they're going to anyway, they've got a bunch of researchers, they're going to do different types of water-based aerosols and so on. They're going to try to mimic the respiratory sprays that happen with the virus to try and figure out to make sure they can keep it safe.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellip. 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Stocks pushing toward records. We are close to session highs. Right now, the S&P up 43. That is a gain of 1.2%. Congress moving toward a federal spending package that would boost the economy. That is lifting optimism on Wall Street, with the Dow up 321 now, up 1.1%, again close to session highs. NASDAQ up 137, up 1.1%, bringing its year-to-date gain to 40.2%. The 10-year's down 5/32, 10-year yield 0.91%. Gold up $26 the ounce now, up 1.4% at $18.53. And West Texas Intermediate crude is up 1.3%, $47.59 a barrel on WTI, up now by 60 cents. Recapping, stocks are higher. S&P up 42, up 1.2 flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
It is time for the drive to the close, and back with us is John Trainer. He's Chief Investment Officer at People's United Advisors, roughly $9 billion in assets under management. John with us, joining Tim and myself. He is on the phone in Bridgeport, Connecticut. This, as we see, as Charlie mentioned, stocks pretty much hovering near their best levels of the session. So, Tim, we're up about 1% here.
There's optimism.
There is some optimism. Hey, John, come on in on this. The optimism that we're seeing in the markets, it seems to be over stimulus, potentially another round of aid coming from the federal government. How do you see it right now?
Well, it would be fantastic to get this behind us. We're frankly surprised it's taken this long, but any stimulus that we can get would really give us a nice head of steam heading into next year. So I think that's what you're seeing in the market. It's almost a relief rally, but it's long overdue and great to hear, great to see.
What size stimulus do we need?
You know, our GDP forecast for next year is 3.7%.
It's lower than others. That's lower than a lot of the big banks.
Yeah, it is. It is. A lot of them have been moving up, and it really is based upon the stimulus. If we get, I've seen the cuts where everybody says at $1 trillion, here's my forecast. At $1.5 trillion, my forecast moves up. So what we'd love to see is the stimulus come out. Let's see how it's impacted. We hope it's really focused on helping the unemployed and helping small business, and we could potentially be moving up our GDP forecast based upon what we see. So, it's only positive news for us going into next year from the GDP side.
Yeah, so positivity. So I do wonder, in terms of portfolio allocation or where you want to kind of allocate some new money, I'm looking at some of the names that you're interested. A lot of them are consumer-based. Nike, Dollar General. What's the Nike story for you?
For us, one of the things we're looking at are companies that are really controlling their destiny through increased sales. And Nike has just done a fantastic job, not only through the normal retail channels, but on the direct-to-consumer side. So we like Nike just because we see accelerating revenue growth next year, driven by organic growth, and that, to us, is really going to be rewarded next year. So we like that story.
What about Dollar General? That's a company that you have on your list too.
Yeah, Dollar General. I mean, they've been a great retailer. They've benefited from the pain that we've seen this year, and we think, we still have 10 million people unemployed. If you drew a line at $60,000 in income, people above that are actually doing fairly well. If you're in that lower sector, employment is still down 20% from where we were at the beginning of the year. So we see Dollar General and their target market is continuing to do well next year, almost as a buffer against really some of the pain that we've seen. So we like them going forward, but we want to be exposed to companies really, if you're in the retail sector, we want to see that sales momentum continuing. That to us is the key.
Yeah, I mean, Dollar General has been on such a tear. I'm just looking at kind of annual returns, and we saw it after the financial crisis, right? Like, you know, all of a sudden, people who couldn't afford to maybe go to some other retailers or for even some of the basics, they ended up going to Dollar General, and they really picked up some new customers.
Exactly. And, you know, even though, you know, we will see some stimulus, we believe with the vaccine, we're going to see a rebound in retail. We will see we'll start to go back out to restaurants. That pain in the employment market is going to continue with us for a while. We have a lot of people to get back to work. So Dollar General will still be a bargain for a lot of people.
Up 44% last year, and it's up trending higher again this year.
Wow, it's
up 33% this year.
It's been on a tear.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah.
What about when it comes to Cummins? Because this is kind of a bet on the global economy, right?
It is global and then infrastructure. And what we've been doing, you know, you asked about portfolio positioning. What we've been doing this year, and we really started to do it in July, we entered the year with a real growth bias on in our portfolio, and that has treated us very well this year. But in July, we got more confidence in the Fed, more confidence in the stimulus. We thought we would have a vaccine, so we said at some point that value trade, that broadening trade, is going to work out well. So starting in July, we started to increase our exposure to the more cyclical sectors of the market, and Cummins on a global basis is one of those companies that we want to own. You know, we think that they're positioned well for not only the U.S., but really a global rebound, but you really want to be exposed to more cyclical sectors, not dramatically, not the deep cyclicals, but you want to be exposed to more economically sensitive stocks as you head into next year.
What specifically though about Cummins? You could play that economically sensitive, cycle a couple of different ways when it comes into, kind of the industrial space. Why Cummins though specifically?
Well, just because we like the fact that they're market leaders. They're very well exposed to not only trucking but the construction business, and we just think you're going to see, if you see investments in infrastructure, Cummins is going to be a big player in that. And we think on a global basis, infrastructure is going to be one of the key areas that we'll benefit from.
It's already up 24% this year.
Yeah.
It's had a good run, a very good run, but we see a lot more in it.
Thermo Fisher Scientific, ticker is TMO, stock's up almost 45%. You've got a forward-looking PE of about 25. What is it? And you've also got a little bit of a dividend there. But what is it about this one? Is it just that whole health tech explosion that we're seeing coming off of COVID?
Yeah, we've liked Thermo for quite a while, and we almost look at it as our chicken way of playing the healthcare, playing the biotech cycle, because, for us, it's very difficult, and for a lot of analysts, it's very difficult to find a company that's going to have the hot new drug that'll get approval. What we'd rather do is buy the arms supplier to that marketplace. No matter who you are, if you're doing research, you need to work with Thermo. So it's our way to benefit from the biotech revolution going on in the country right now, but to do it on a broad-based basis rather than try and pick the right company with the right drug.
And they're a $186 billion market cap. Are they the market leader? I'm curious how fragmented this market is.
Now, Thermo is the market leader. They are the play in this space, and it's what we would consider to be just it's our bread and butter holding in this area.
I can see why. Interesting stuff. Hey, love talking names with you, John. Thank you so much. Be well, stay safe, and have a good holiday. John Traynor, Chief Investment Officer, People's United Wealth Management, $9 billion in assets under management, based in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I love talking names.
Yeah, I do too. And you know what? We haven't spoken at all about the snow that's coming yet.
Oh, I know. Well, you and I have in the break.
Yeah, we have, and that's what I've been thinking about.
Well, listen, they're anticipating it starts, tomorrow afternoon?
Tomorrow afternoon.
Into the evening. It could be maybe 17, 18 inches, or it could be half of that.
Depending on where you are.
Exactly. And if the storm moves west, it could be, more of the Western Jersey folks are doing.
But we'll be here. We
will be here.
We'll be on the radio.
We might be working from home.
All right, we'll see.
We'll see. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Radio, and we've got the closing bell coming your way in just a few minutes. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. There you have it. Sound of the closing bell at the New York Stock Exchange as we wrap up trading on this Tuesday, December 15th. A move higher right into the close. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all moving higher as Congress heads towards a federal spending package that would boost the economy. By the way, folks from Greek American Issuer Day virtually ringing that closing bell. So an up day with the S&P rebounding from a 4-day slide up today by 47 points at 3694. That was a gain of 1.3%. The Dow up 340 at the close, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 155 points, up 1.3%. For the year, NASDAQ is now up by 40.4%. 10-year yield 0.90%. Gold up 1.5%, 18.54 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.3%, 47.58 a barrel. So in advance today for the U.S. stock market, what was pushing stocks higher? John Traynor is Chief Investment Officer at People's United Advisors. He was our guest moments ago, right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
It would be fantastic to get this behind us. We're frankly surprised it's taken this long, but boy, any stimulus that we can get would really give us a nice head of steam heading into next year. So I think that's what you're seeing in the market. It's almost a relief rally, but it's long overdue and great to hear, great to see.
Indeed, stocks extended gains after Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said he will keep lawmakers in Washington until a deal gets done. S&P, as I mentioned, advancing by 47 points, up 1.3%. Apple generally seeing robust demand for its iPhone 12 models. This according to analysts with Ed Wedbush pointing to a Nikkei Asia report on production. Today, Apple shares rallied by 5%. Snowflake out of San Mateo, California, moving lower today, extending a 3-day slump after the expiration of a lockup that restricted company insiders from selling shares. Today, Snowflake, ahead of a big storm on the East Coast, down by 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Whoa, yeah, what I say.
Nobody move a muscle.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and shakers.
Damn, Stiffy, you got some moves.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio in New York City at Bloomberg headquarters. And I'm going to bring in Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Sarah Ponczak, as well as I just do kind of big picture here in terms of how we closed on this Tuesday. S&P 500 risk trade on, and you could see that even in the last few minutes of trading, we saw an uptick in those major equity averages, causing really the NASDAQ, I'm looking at it, yeah, pretty much to, I think, end at its best level of the day. S&P 500, 453 names in the index, higher today, 52 lower, 1 unchanged. And as Charlie mentioned, we did see more than 1% gains on all of those major equity averages. Quick check on those industry groups in the S&P 500. There are 11 main industry groups in the S&P. All of them are up. Top of the pack, utilities. We heard that from Dave Wilson earlier, up almost 2%. Energy up almost 2%. Bottom of the pack, consumer staples, but still with a gain of about 0.25%. Sarah Ponczak, I mean, this was a day where we saw a fair amount of optimism, measured optimism, but nonetheless, definitely higher.
We did see a fair amount of optimism and really a resumption of the rally that we had seen prior to, say, the last 4 days. The S&P had been down the last 4 days. If you look at the sectors in the S&P 500 that are your worst performing this year, it's utilities, real estate, financials, and energy at the bottom of the pack. Well, if you look at your best performers today, you see plenty of overlap, as you just outlined. Really the only one that's in the mix of the top 4 or 5 that I did not just read out is materials, which of course is a cyclical stock as well. So we see this resumption of this cyclical value rally once again. I also want to point out the Russell 2000 once again today, up more than 2% to a record high. So small caps, cyclical value. It's a continuation of this trade. And yes, it's true. Today we did see optimism over fiscal stimulus. Possibly McConnell did come out and say that he was going to keep lawmakers in Washington until they did get a deal done. Now, we'll see how much this is talk. We have heard words like this before. When will we actually see something, a pen put to paper? But there is surely optimism in the markets.
Right, and as Vince Signorella, reminded us of Bloomberg News, and Bloomberg Squawk, there's real people behind, who are waiting, those that are struggling in the country that are waiting for more stimulus, and there's small businesses that are struggling. So we need to keep that in mind as we talk about kind of the big, broad stimulus package. There are people and businesses just waiting for another help and a little bit more assistance. Hey, one thing you flagged it, and this is B of A. They're out with a survey. Tell us what they're finding.
Right. So Bank of America puts out a fund manager survey every month. Today, we got their latest survey, which took place in the beginning of the month, beginning of December. And basically, what we see is that investors are very bullish. In fact, investors right now, fund managers who were surveyed are the most bullish on stocks and commodities, so your risk on assets since February of 2011. At the same time, they're underweight cash for the first time since May of 2013. Now, what Bank of America says is that put this all together, they say that this is triggering a sell signal, and they are advising that people sell the vaccine news. You buy the rumor, sell the news. Well, once we get the vaccine news, they're saying that optimism is already so high that much of the forward outlook is already baked into markets that it's going to be really difficult to see a strong, really sustainable rally from this point in time. And you just see that optimism reflected in the survey that they released.
I just wonder, though, because there are still some names, and if I look at year to date, the rankings among the major industry groups, you've got energy down 35%, financials are down 7%, real estate's down 6%. If we look at individual names, you know it, right? Whether it's some of the hospitality names, the cruise industry. There's still, though, names that are down significantly on the year. And I do think when the economy reopens, they're going to bounce big time.
And that's exactly the point that many investors are making at this point in time. If you feel that you missed out on the rally, say, all year long, there haven't been many large opportunities, large sell-offs, other than earlier in the beginning of the year, February, March, to really put cash to work by the dip. What some big strategists are now saying, and it's almost becoming a consensus view, is that you're looking at benchmarks at or near record highs, but that masks a lot of what is going on underneath the surface. So if you believe in an economic recovery, that the vaccine is going to help us move forward, we'll see a normalization of the economy.
Right.
Well, sure, maybe you don't want to buy the benchmarks, but there are plenty of opportunities underneath the surface that are still pretty beaten up, and you still have room for upside.
All right. Good stuff as always. Hey, Sarah, take care. Have a good night. Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Sarah Ponczek joining us on the phone in New York. You are listening to Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the door. It's Dave.
Who?
Dave.
Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Let's get right to it. Dave Wilson, your stock of the day. Ticker is LDL.
Right, Lidol, it's a maker of filters, insulation, and acoustical barriers. Its products include filters for face masks and ventilation systems. So the company's benefited from the coronavirus pandemic. Lidl's history begins in 1869. The company went public in 1963. The ticker, as you mentioned, Carol, LDL. The share set a record in December 2016 and then plummeted as much as 93% through this past March. Lidl has recouped about half the loss so far. Now, the company met with analysts and investors last week and forecast a profit gauge would more than double in the next 5 years. The company also predicted a return indicator would rise to the highest level since the mid-1990s. Lidl CEO Sarah Greenstein followed up yesterday with an appearance on CNBC's Mad Money with Jim Cramer, and she highlighted the company's filter business and all that's happened because of the pandemic. Now, this sent Lidl shares up as much as 19%. They reached their highest price since October 2018, and they closed with a gain of 12%.
Wow, really big bump up. So pretty significant. What's it doing for the year?
Well, let me take a quick look.
Let me bring it up too.
Bloomberg terminal.
Up 61%.
Yes, 61%.
I just saw it. Wow.
I mean, you talk about a pandemic type of stock.
Totally.
And it's not going to stop just because, the vaccine's here. I mean, we're still going to want better filtration in our buildings and whatnot. So you figure company will benefit from that.
Right. And people are going to be planning ahead. If they weren't in, good shape and they haven't done the updates, they're going to be doing it going forward. You're right. It's going to be something that we think about much more significantly and deliberately. Hey, Dave, thank you so much. Dave Wilson, have a good evening with his stock of the day. Again, the ticker is LDL Lidl. All right, let's get to world and national news for that. Let's head to Mark Mills in the Bloomberg Newsroom. Hi, Mark.
Hey, Carol, thanks. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell recognized Joe Biden as the winner of the presidential election.
the day after the Electoral College confirmed his victory, a pivotal moment that further cements President Donald Trump's defeat.
Today, I want to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden. The President-elect is no stranger to the Senate. He's devoted himself to public service for many years.
President Trump is still pursuing legal options to reverse the election results, a point noted by White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany when asked about McConnell's acknowledgement of Biden's victory.
I haven't gotten the president's reaction to that yet, but the president, again, is pursuing ongoing litigation, would refer you to the campaign for further.
President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will take their oaths of office outside the U.S. Capitol building on January 20th, but inauguration planners want to craft an event that captures the traditional grandeur of the historic ceremony while complying with COVID-19 protocols. Biden's team is urging supporters not to come to Washington, D.C. on that day. Infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci is urging Joe Biden to get the COVID vaccination.
You want him fully protected as he enters into the presidency in January. So that would be my strong recommendation.
Fauci said the same applies to Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio told residents to prepare for a shutdown of all but essential businesses soon after Christmas. And President-elect Biden has chosen Pete Buttigieg, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, to be his transportation secretary. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. This is Bloomberg.
Thank you so much, Mark Mills. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser, in our interactive broker studio in New York City. Joining me is Charlie Pellet of Bloomberg News. Charlie, you saw this story from the team over at Dow Jones Wall Street Journal. Has to do with this winter storm that we're anticipating starting tomorrow, heading into Thursday. And it's all about what does this mean for New York City's restaurants who are already just dealing with so much and already dealing with, shutting down indoor dining.
Yeah, exactly. And all I can think about is for our audience across the country, you've got fairly small New York City neighborhood streets, not the avenues that go up and down, but the cross streets can be fairly narrow, especially when you've got just a couple of, maybe even one lane of traffic there. But we've got a lot of these, I'll call them shacks. I could call them a Shake Shack when we start getting all of the snowplows going by. But these emphasis on relatively flimsy structures because they are designed to be temporary.
Right.
What is going to happen when we get 14 inches of snow hitting New York City and you've got these plows going up and down these narrow streets?
I think it's going to be potentially a nightmare. And it also depends on how much snow we ultimately get. But yeah, I mean, first of all, can the structures even withstand the storm? So if it's windy, you do wonder whether some of these setups are just not going to be able to endure, essentially. And apparently, someone had said to me earlier, Charlie, that the city was demanding that they be turned down. And apparently that's not the case. The city has not called for restaurants, at least according to this reporting, for restaurants to dismantle the structures outright, but is saying that furniture, those outdoor heaters and other things be brought in. But I do think about that true. There's lots of space on the avenues, right? And you can, the plows can get through, but on those side streets, you're right, Charlie, and if there's cars, it's going to be potentially pretty messy.
Exactly. Now, I have never driven a snowplow, but I have tremendous respect for the men and women who do here in New York City. But my sense of driving a plow is this is more of an art than it is a precise science in terms of the control that you have as to where the snow eventually gets plowed to.
And apparently they have different size plows, so the Department of Sanitation says, we've got this, we're on it, but we shall certainly see. We hope so for those restaurants. Thanks, Charlie.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service developing story. President Trump's security advisor cutting an overseas trip short for talks on that massive security hack. Again, stocks did move higher today. In fact, NASDAQ ended today's session at a record 12,595 on the NASDAQ Composite Index, up 155 points, up by 1.3%. The NASDAQ 100 Index up 1.1% today. A lot of optimism about stimulus. The S&P up by 47 points, snapping a four-day losing streak, up 1.3%. The Dow up 337 points, up 1.1%. 10-year down 4/32, 10-year yield 0.90%. Gold up 1.4%, 18.53 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, 47.54 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So we talked earlier about Bloomberg News senior trade and globalization reporter Sean Donnan and his story about how America's economy faces a zombie recovery. Just concerned about what happens with businesses going forward. So let's talk about that. Let's also see what the Fed might be able to do. Remember, they've got their last meeting of the year. That is tomorrow. Danny Blanchflower is back with us, professor of economics at Dartmouth College, former Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee member. He is on the phone from Florida. Danny, it's good to have you back with us. How are you?
Great chat. Great to chat. Very good. I mean, what very interesting days.
Well, why do you say that? I mean, I agree for many different reasons.
I think in a sense of, think of the difficulty we always have. Try to think about what's the central bank going to do? What's going to happen to the economy? Well, we have all sorts of uncertainties going on here. We've just seen a presidential election. We have the pandemic and these vaccines coming out all over the country. But I think the big issue, as you rightly say, is what's the shape of that recovery? How is this going to happen? And I think the other big thing, well, two big things. What long-run changes in behavior are people going to make? You know, are they going to continue to not be in New York City and be in New Hampshire?
Right.
Which we've seen.
Or Florida.
I mean, I think that's the big one. And then the other one is, okay, we're talking about stimulus, we're talking about what the Fed might do. But the question is, to what extent are firms actually going to be able to reopen? I mean, okay, you've been helping workers and so on. What proportion of restaurants are going to reopen? What proportion of firms in a year's time are going to reopen? And those are very uncertain things, more uncertain than usual, I would say, and really important for us to try and understand.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exactly, right? And I do think closing a business, it takes a lot for someone to do it. And sometimes you're just like, okay, I have no other choice. But also starting up another business, it's got to be the right environment. And I do think, I don't know whether, Danny, everybody thinks just things are going to bounce back quickly when the economy happens. I don't think that's the case for a small business.
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, let's go to the two bits of that. Obviously, there's been existing firms that are open, and the struggle is, can we reopen? Can we keep this thing going? But think about new firms that potentially were going to be created. Can you go to the bank and get a loan based upon projections of the kind of customer base you're going to have? Probably not. And so the uncertainty about what the future would look like impacts the survivability of firms, but it also impacts job creation and firm creation.
Right.
So I think, in a sense, the central bank and the federal government have to step in, if you like, and prop all of this up until eventually we can get back to normal. I mean, in some sense, how long is this vaccine going to take to get people and be broadly based enough that people can return to normal? So I think the answer is that we're in very uncertain times. The Fed certainly tomorrow, and they're meeting today, but they're certainly going to be worried about the downside risk to the economy. They're also, of course, going to worry about the fact that this is still highly politically charged time in this lame duck session, and they're probably going to sit back and wait for the new Treasury Secretary, wait for the government to take place. So my sense would be having been on a committee like this, they're going to tread very cautiously now. And if any action is going to come, it will probably come at the next meeting, not this one.
Yeah, it makes sense, right, to see the team. And we've certainly seen U.S. Federal Reserve, Jay Powell and company, Jay Powell specifically looking in times of crisis where he wants to work with the Treasury Secretary. He wants to work with Congress. He's kind of this, idea that we've all got to kind of figure this out together.
Well, I think that's right. And obviously, I'm very pleased to know that the Treasury Secretary is a Labour economist, the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors is Labour economist, friends of mine, and they're very conscious about real people, wages, employment, small firms, job creation. They're very conscious of that, and and the reality is that the central bank can't really do that much, given that in the jargon they're sitting very much at the zero lower bound. And they clearly need coordination with the Treasury. So you're certainly not going to do much of anything until the new Treasury Secretary is in place. But I think you're right. I mean, around the world, the reality is that in 2008, when all the stuff was going on, central banks could cut interest rates by 500 basis points. Mm-hmm. That's not the game in town now.
Right.
And so we're going to have to think creatively about negative rates, about what sort of QE is there going to be, and especially what sort of targeted stimulus is going to be from the Treasury to try and deal with the small business problem, the wages problem, employment, and so on. So these are really big issues, but I don't think the Fed will think they can act alone.
Danny, we've got about a minute, and then we're going to do some news, and we'll come back. But what is it that you and I've talked a lot about the American workers. You've done a Bloomberg Live event with us, and we've talked about American workers. What are you most worried about when it comes to American workers during this time? And again, we've just got about 50 seconds or so.
I think it's actually that we had some data out of the UK today, and it looks just like the US. And here's the thing that I worry about.
Yeah.
I worry about the low part of the wage distribution. I mean, what we've seen as unemployment rises, for people listening, this is a real puzzle. As the unemployment rate picked up, wage growth rose like crazy in the United States, from around 2.5% to 6, 7, and 8%. Well, why is that? Well, it's actually because the lowest part of the wage distribution has dropped out. So what's happened is that everything looks like it's like the batting average of a team when the two worst batsmen have dropped out. So I do worry a lot about what are we going to do about those people who were vulnerable anyway, who have been, think of people in restaurants. Yeah, the restaurants closed, but the waitresses and the bartenders and all of those folks. So I think, and if you listen to Janet Yellen and C.C. Rouse, they're saying essentially the same things. We need to be very concerned about the recovery, but especially about the fact that the lowest part of the wage distribution has basically disappeared. And that's true in the UK too.
Danny, hang on. Danny Blanchflower over at Dartmouth. We're going to get back to him in just a moment. You are listening to Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live to New York, Bloomberg 1130. To Washington, D.C., Bloomberg 99.1. To Boston, Bloomberg 106.1. To San Francisco, Bloomberg 960. To the country, Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Carol Masser in our Interactive Brokers studio. Coming up, we're going to continue with Danny Blanchflower, professor of economics over at Dartmouth College, continuing because I want to pick his brain a little bit more about maybe policies we need to get in place to help out workers who are really going to be, who already are hurt and probably will take a little bit of time to come back on the other side of this pandemic. So we'll get into that and get back to him in just a second. First up, back to your top business stories, some news after the close. Here is Charlie Bellett.
Thank you very much, Carol Master. Do want to begin with a developing story brought to the headline about 10 minutes ago, but National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien is returning early from a trip to the Middle East and Europe to deal with that hack of U.S. government agencies. This is according to a National Security Council spokesperson. Now, a source did say that O'Brien had planned to return to Washington this Saturday, but visited only Israel and France before canceling stops in Italy, Germany, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. IBM has bought Expertus Technologies. It is a Canadian financial tech firm that helps process more than $50 billion in transactions a day to bolster its electronic payments capabilities. European regulators have lifted their de facto ban on bank dividends while imposing strict limits on payout levels to help lenders maintain financial strength during the pandemic. Stocks halted a 4-day losing streak as Congress moved toward a federal spending package that would boost the economy. That's sent stocks higher. In fact, NASDAQ is at a record, up 155 points today, up 1.25%, bringing its year-to-date gain for the NASDAQ Composite Index to 40.4%. S&P up 47. That was a gain of 1.3%. The Dow rallied 337 points, up 1.1%. Tenured on 430 seconds, 10-year yield 0.90%. Gold up 1.5%, 18.54 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.1%, 47.52 a barrel. So it was an up day on Wall Street. A lot of optimism about stimulus. Kristen Bitterly is with Citigroup Global Markets, and on Bloomberg Television and Radio this morning, she told us she is keeping an eye on the COVID numbers.
You can't keep ignoring the bad news. It's something that's going to drive the market. It's going to drive volatility in the market. And so the number of increased cases, the increased deaths, especially news of potential lockdowns, we're going to see some choppy markets over the next couple of weeks. And I think fiscal stimulus is another part that is also obviously closely linked.
The Food and Drug Administration says Moderna's vaccine is safe and effective for preventing COVID-19, clearing the way for a second shot to quickly gain emergency authorization and add to the country's sprawling immunization effort. Shares did move lower today, down by 5%. Eli Lilly buying Prevail Therapeutics for about $1 billion to gain gene therapies that treat neurodegenerative disease such as Parkinson's and certain forms of dementia. Today, Lilly surged 6%. The real story, though, Prevail jumping by 82%, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, appreciate that update. I want to get right back to Danny Blanchflower, professor of economics at Dartmouth, former Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee member, still on the phone with us from Florida. Hey, Danny, you know, I have to say one of the things that increasingly makes me uncomfortable, and I do wonder whether it's getting enough attention. I don't feel that way, depending, especially based on how long it's taken to get another round of stimulus out of the U.S. federal government, is just this widening gap. And we've talked about this, you know, too, and you said you're worried about kind of the lower end of wage distribution. I just wonder, are we just setting aside another group of Americans, you know, once again, you know, and they're going to be left behind even further as we come out of this? Or are there policies we can put into place that help them out significantly?
Well, I think there are, and I think I was just saying in the last section that if you listen to the new Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, and C.C. Rouse going to the Council, both were very concerned about these issues. I mean, we've seen, obviously there's been issues, if we look back at the deaths of despair that have been occurring, have been particularly amongst prime age, less educated folks. And so that's a really big deal. And I think what we're seeing here is, well, a couple of things. Obviously, when central banks go in and buy lots of assets, that pushes up assets. And we've just heard today, in your news break, that the NASDAQ hit record levels. So people holding assets have done pretty well. But then the question is, what about people who aren't? And what about people at the very low end? And I think that's a really big deal. Obviously, you want to keep the economy, we've heard about lockdowns and the spread of COVID. So the classic example is when the private sector is not spending, and this is true in a pandemic, the public sector has to step in, and that's what this fiscal stimulus is about, backed up by the central banks. But the concern is that you have to get money to the people who are unemployed, get money to the people at the low end who may even have a job, but they can't get enough hours. And I think the other thing, Carol, which concerns me is this issue that the Census Bureau has identified, which is the proportion of people in America who say, I can't get enough food. And that's in an advanced country like ours, that's something we need to be mindful of. So we need to do that. And I think Mnuchin has been very good on this. We need not only to get money to people, but we need to get money to people quickly. So you put it in their bank accounts, you get it to them right now. And the concern, of course, is that the payments that are going on now, many of them stop at the end of the year. So I think it's really crucial that we get food to poor people and we get food to children. I mean, it really is that serious. And it's going to take a while until this vaccine kind of gets us back to normal again. But I just think we have to be mindful of the vulnerable.
Well, hey, before we go, we've got about a minute or a minute and a half left here. What are you expecting in terms of the vaccine getting to you, so that your world and your Dartmouth world gets back to normal? When are you anticipating that? We're talking to a lot of doctors, and they're saying
I always try and make a rule in the COVID thing to say I'm not a doctor, I'm not an epidemiologist. I mean, I think the news has been fantastic, and we've started to see the trucks rolling out. But I think this is just classic uncertainty. I mean, the issue is states by states. Each state is going to do it differently. Each state is going to have to work out on a Friday how many doses that it's got. So I think the answer is that everyone's mucked in. This is absolutely fantastic. But at this moment, this is just a very uncertain time. I mean, 3 months ago, we probably wouldn't imagine that we were here.
Right.
But I think the answer is going to take economies a long time to adjust to this. And also to think, in the long run, might this happen again? So, normality looks a long way off.
Well, fingers crossed. Danny, have a safe and happy holiday season, and just be well. I know it's just kind of an odd world that we're in, and we really appreciate when you can spend some time with us. Danny Blanchflower, professor of economics at Dartmouth College, joining us on the phone from Hanover, New Hampshire. And just kind of, interesting to be listening to, what he has to say. And we've got to remember to think about all of these people who've lost jobs and what initiatives and plans need to be put in place to really help them out. All right, for those of you listening in New York and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues. If you're listening on Bloomberg 99.1 in DC, Sound On with Kevin Cirilli, that is underway. You are listening to Bloomberg Radio. Let's get a check on world and national news. Over to Mark Mills in our DC, not in DC, in our Bloomberg newsroom. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Carol, thanks. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell congratulated Democrat Joe Biden as president-elect on Tuesday, saying the Electoral College has spoken. The Republican leader's statement ended weeks of silence over President Trump's defeat. It came a day after electors met and officially affirmed Biden's election win. President-elect Biden said he spoke with McConnell.
I called him to thank him for the congratulations. Told him, although we disagree on a lot of things, there's things we can work together on. We've always been straight with one another, and we agreed we'd get together sooner than later.
GOP Congressman Mo Brooks of Alabama said Tuesday he'll object when Congress convenes January 6th to count certificates of electoral votes, usually a ceremonial process to confirm the results of the presidential election. President Trump has so far refused to concede and urged his supporters to fight on. On the floor of the Senate, Minority Leader Chuck Schumer urged Trump to accept defeat.
President Trump should take his cue from Leader McConnell that it's time to end his term with a modicum of grace and dignity.
Moderna's vaccine was deemed safe by U.S. regulators, clearing the way for a second shot to quickly gain emergency authorization. Infectious disease expert Dr. Anthony Fauci spoke of the urgency to get the country vaccinated.
We've got to get people vaccinated as quickly and as expeditiously as we possibly can until we get that herd immunity, as we say, which will require, in my opinion, about 75 to 80% of the population getting vaccinated.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Mark Mills. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Mark, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master joining me right now is Charlie Pellet, and a story that caught our attention out on the Bloomberg has to do with a Societe Generale banker who had a 3-year sabbatical, and I guess he failed to show up after that ended, and the bank fired him.
Worth repeating, as Tom Keene
failed to show up.
Well, that's part of it, but the other part. How long was that sabbatical? I didn't quite hear that part
You're
correctly.
Like, excuse me? Do places actually give a 3-year sabbatical?
Apparently they do in France. Now, under French law, from what I understand from our Bloomberg story by our Gaspard Sabag, if you leave a company in France to start a business, you are allowed to come back to your previous position. Now, if that position is no longer available, companies have to offer a similar job with at least the same pay. And apparently he was managing a number of people. He wanted to come back after a 3-year sabbatical and be offered a position that was similar to the job that he held before leaving. By the way, we do not know this individual's name. Mr. X is
so
his
mysterious.
name. It really is, but we know the company, Societe Generale. But yes, I'm struck, perhaps like you, that the concept of a 3-year sabbatical exists. There comes a point where an employer, I would suggest, has the absolute right to say, see you later.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting, right? Like, what's the understanding? What was the arrangement? I'm still like, I don't know. I'm a little confused over this story because it's like, as you said, gone for 3 years. And there is an understanding, right, that maybe you're going to come back to exactly the same thing. But I feel like, I don't know whether the, job field, things are kind of fluid sometimes in some of this, especially 3 years is a long time in any industry. A lot can change in terms of skills, in terms of what's needed. And I think this is kind of interesting.
Indeed. And it just points to the very different, without editorializing or offering up any of my opinions on this topic, but 3-year sabbatical, but it does point to very different images of the way that labor law works in France.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, Charlie, thank you. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a developing story. Breaking news, consolidation in the medical marijuana industry. We've got BNN Bloomberg TV reporting that Tilray and Afria are in advanced merger talks. Both of these companies are based in Canada. After hours, looking at Tilray shares, they are surging by 14%. Afria shares, after hours here in the U.S., they are up now by 5%. Worth repeating the headline, though. Tilray, Afria in advanced merger talks, is according to BNN Bloomberg TV. Stocks halted a 4-day losing streak as Congress moved toward a federal spending package that would boost the economy. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all rallying today. NASDAQ at a record up 155 points to 12,595, up by 1.25%. S&P up 47, up 1.3%. The Dow up 337, up by 1.1%. 10-year down 5/30 seconds. 10-year yield 0.90%. We've got gold up 1.5%, 18.53 the ounce, and crude up 1.2%, 47.57 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, it is time for our 12 Days of Gift Giving series, and today our wine critic, who tasted more than 2,100 wines this year, picks 10 that actually stand out. So it's great to have back with us Aileen McCoy. She's wine and spirits columnist at Bloomberg News. She's on the phone from Connecticut. Aileen, so nice to have you here with us. So actually, I think it was 2,108 wines. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's a lot of wine.
That is correct. And it's very nice to be here, Carol, again with you. But I should say that 2,108 does not include all the wines that I didn't think were worth taking a tasting note on.
Oh, my God.
And it's about half of what I usually taste in a year.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you before we get in, excuse me, into the 10 wines that stand out for you is, how did you do this? I mean, all of our worlds were disrupted. We know that. So how did you do this? And how did it compare to how you usually do it in a pre-COVID world?
In a pre-COVID world, I travel a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm tasting wherever I go. I'm going to tastings in New York City on a consistent basis, maybe, a few times a week at least. And this year, none of that was possible. So the first few months, the first 2.5 months to be precise, I did travel Paris to the Champagne region, obviously tasting in New York, etc. But once lockdown happened, suddenly I was canceling trips to Germany, to Burgundy, to Bordeaux, etc., etc., California, of course. And so I had to rely, as almost everyone has been relying on, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, FaceTime. I feel that I've learned how to do all these different virtual online methods of communicating. I wouldn't have believed a non-techie like me could have learned.
We've all learned, right? I feel like this should actually be a segment, Aileen, about pairing like wines with the virtual platform. What wine goes best with Zoom? What wine goes best with? Because I know we've all tried. I've had wine with family and cocktail hours on these platforms. All right, so let's get to some of the wines that stood out for you, because you did have to whittle it down. So, and I saw in your story, you do at least do kind of a breakdown between under 200, over 200. So maybe let's start with the under 200.
Well, the way I pick it is not always just I'm not just picking the very best wines I ever tasted during the year. I'm picking wines that stood out for me as experiences. There's some reason why I picked them beyond the fact that they're just a great wine. So, for example, for $23, I picked out a discovery wine, the 2019 Diamantacos Precnati. Precnati is the grape. And I picked it out because, one, it's delicious, and number two, I had never even heard of this grape.
Yeah.
And it reminded me that the great thing about wine is you never know everything.
Mm-hmm. You can still learn, right?
Learning, right?
Well,
and so that was I picked that. It's a white. It's from northern Greece. A little bit like Viognier, but it's a little drier, a little brighter, a little more mineral, and really delicious.
And if I'm reading this right, you said it's made from an almost extinct local grape?
Yes.
Wow.
There are two people in Greece that are reviving it. They found some old vines that were practically dead and nurtured them back to life in order to see what these wines would taste like from grapes from these old vines.
So cool. That is so cool.
And yeah, I know. Isn't that a great story? I love stories like that. Another wine that really stood out for me was the Tablas Creek Vineyard Esprit de Tablas Blanc. It's a white wine. It's a blend of 5 different varieties. It's from California, from Paso Robles. And the thing it's a fantastically delicious wine. But the thing also that stood out for me is the stance of this winery. They've been organic since the beginning, and they have achieved, they're the first regenerative organic certified winery in the world. And this whole idea of regenerative farming is something that's been promoted a lot by Patagonia.
Yep.
Which is not obviously what you necessarily think of when you think of wine, but Tablas Creek was their test pilot program for a winery using regenerative farming that's being promoted by Patagonia in their whole provisions division. So that was really special to me. I think it's important to remember that you can be socially responsible when you drink. You can drink wines that are,
I love
wine.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, I love it because I could just let you go. But Aileen, I love that whole idea, and I feel like we're hearing more about that organic. And I've talked with Jenna Johnson, who heads up Patagonia, and they're looking at farming. I mean, their whole mission is how to do it better, and they're thinking about this, and they're also looking at what impacts the environment the most. And farming is a big deal of it. And so I love this whole idea that this is coming up on your list. We only have about 40 seconds left, 45. Give me one more, maybe. Our story broke it into under 200, over 200. So give me one that we should all shoot for. That's just a killer, just quickly.
Well, I think I'm not going to give you, I'll give you the fantastic champagne, the all Chardonnay champagne, the 2006 Krug Clos de Ménil, for $1,195 because everybody has to drink some kind of bubbles during the holidays. It's fantastic. It comes from a very, very tiny piece of property in Champagne. And the wine, that in Champagne, most champagnes are a blend of many vineyards. This is from one vineyard.
Well, I love how you describe its sumptuous, creamy texture. So I'm going to share this out on Twitter because Aileen always does a great job and there's many more wines she talks about. Aileen, thank you so much. Have a great holiday. Love when she joins us. Aileen McCoy, wine and spirits columnist at Bloomberg News, joining us on the phone from Connecticut. You're listening to Bloomberg.